Motherhood, but not quite as we imagine. Thought-provoking, refreshing, straightforward, sometimes taboo, often seemingly ordinary, but always honest. Welcome to School for Mothers, opening conversations we all need to have, exploring ways in which you can be fulfilled as a woman, once a mother. Now, here is your host, mother of 10, Danusia Melina Durban.
I'm starting with a confession. I'm pretty relaxed in my own podcast. I kind of feel at home with my mic and all of you. But in this episode, I sound like I'm on a chair in front of the headmaster at school. Well, rather than re-record this so I sound bright and breezy, here's the uptight, prissy version for you. Remember, we don't have to be perfect. We want to be growing. Who's with me on that? Let's get to it, shall we? Welcome everyone to this special final episode of the School for Mothers podcast, or SFM as a lot of people call it. You heard that right. This is the last episode of this show, and I'm sharing about the episode I was just too afraid to publish, and how it helped me pivot the School for Mothers podcast into a rebrand launching in late 2023. Keep listening for eyebrow-raising details. I'm Danusia Melina Durban, businesswoman, author, podcaster, and mother of 10. For anyone new here, I'm not known for beating around the bush. I asked tough questions of my SFM guests. However, there's one episode, one recording I've been sitting on and ruminating over for a long time. There's good reasons why I'm taking a step back from my usual SFM interview style, because I'm going to give you a window into a big dilemma I faced around my conversation with Katie Hopkins. Yes, that Katie Hopkins.
I'm just imagining now your lovely listeners all go, oh my God, not that damn woman.
Now, I wouldn't blame you if you're thinking, how in heaven's name did this conversation come about? Why would Katie, well known for her far-right, abrasive and often hateful commentary on race, religion, class and politics, come on my podcast? The School for Mothers show is all about motivating and amplifying women of every background. It's quite simple. When I was setting out on my SFM journey in late 2018, I had a hard think about the kinds of people I wanted to feature. My dream guests. This led me to the obvious opposite. Who didn't I want on the show? Katie Hopkins immediately sprung to mind. This information was clear-cut. She was top of the very small list of people I just didn't want to interview. Let me pause right here and say that although I had an immediate no to Katie being on the show, I was curious about how she navigates her life notoriety for making inflammatory, offensive and often discriminatory remarks about various social and political issues, alongside being a mother to her daughters. Her commentary targets individuals or groups based on race, religion, immigration status, and appearance, among other characteristics. The one-syllable word title for her episode, in our well-worn School for Mothers style, was bitch. Seemed a reasonable title, as she's outspoken about everything, with the Daily Mail calling her the biggest bitch in Britain. Full transparency. Did I invite Katie on SFM? Yes. I figured she wouldn't say yes to coming on the show anyway. And if she did, it would be a challenging conversation that I felt I had to have. What was the harm in asking? I hadn't thought it through. Less than 1 year later from my original no way do I want Katie Hopkins on the podcast, I was in the middle of what I'd call cordial pod interview scheduling. Our assistants managed communications, but she also emailed me direct. After many hundreds of these interview schedulings, I've known my fair share of clunky, iffy and diva-type pre-recording setups. This was vanilla. I wasn't expecting polite and eager. That's on me. The obstacle I've faced ever since we recorded many moons ago has been when and how to release this episode, if at all. To give you an idea of just how long I've been turning this problem over in my mind, at the original time of recording, Katie had just reached 1 million followers on Twitter. At the time of recording this today, she appears to be banned still from what was Twitter, now rebranded as X, for violating the platform's hateful conduct policy. My conversation with her is the only unpublished episode in all the time I've been hosting this podcast. Before I go any further, let's get clear on something. Am I going to share my full interview with Katie Hopkins with you today? No. I'm choosing to share chunks. Originally, I was interested in what Katie had to say about the intersections of her motherhood and the beliefs and decisions that drive her to act in the provocative ways she does. I got partial answers. How is it for you as a mother? You know, being seen as a bitch, being seen as a hate figure.
If you hate me right now, then you'd probably think, well, 99% of people hate her because that's your view and you assume your view is your truth and the truth.
So who is the regular you, Katie?
I am just a mum who's faced big challenges in life and who is not going to be cowed into not speaking my mind.
We covered a lot more. Stay with me. No matter how carefully I executed this interview, releasing it as was meant giving Katie's voice a platform. Perhaps this episode would have performed well in downloads thanks to the engagement it would have got. Katie understood this.
Yeah, you're going to get a lot of grief for talking to me on your podcast. You're going to get emails saying, why on earth would you give her airtime? You're going to get emails probably saying much more unkind things than that.
How far was I willing to go to make my podcast even more of a metric success through the any PR is good route? Was I willing to stir some controversy for a few extra downloads? You already know the answer. Despite not publishing the episode, I equally couldn't pretend the conversation didn't happen, at the very least to myself. The experience sat with me. Most of all, I reflected on my belief that everybody has something to teach us, whether we like their message or not. A basic value I've been able to uphold here in the show. Except, when I dug deeper, I found it's easy to publish the views of people when they chime with our own. But what do we do when people hold opinions we don't agree with or abhor? My first and safe analysis of the problem of Katie's episode focused on whether she would be hated in the same ways if she were a man. The public view of her and the words used to describe her are, after all, deeply rooted in her gender. Bitch and cow are descriptions used for her in media comments. They're distinctly feminine. A female dog, female cattle. I'd wanted to understand what it's like for her to occupy the space of the bitch when most of women run from labels like this. And so this became the crux of the episode, exploring what it's like for her to live in and own the title of bitch, especially as a mother who I assumed reconciles this label with how her family sees her and how she sees herself.
I guess that's coming from your sort of perspective on me. And I guess I don't see much of it apart from online. It doesn't affect my kids, bizarrely, because I guess they know me. So they know me in my pajamas.
Throughout our conversation, Katie touches on the fact that she speaks her truth. She spreads the truths she sees.
But in a world of mass silencing, in a world of people self-censoring before they even open their mouths, then having someone speak out, even if you disagree with them, is somewhat refreshing.
This idea of self-censoring, especially on the part of women, is a reality for many, if not most of us. There's so much noise out there pushing mothers to know our place, to keep our mouths shut and to smile rather than speak because we might make someone uncomfortable. Setting aside any controversy and what people might think of Katie Hopkins as an individual, I'm tremendously interested in interrupting this process. In 2021, for instance, I wrote a book, Noise, a manifesto modernising motherhood, using a framework of noise as the core of what we're dealing with. School for Mothers interviews from 2018 to date, in multi-layered ways, have been about dismantling gags on women and mothers. In other words, giving voice. I set out on SFM to have conversations we need to have to create better lives for ourselves and for our families. I'm proud to have contributed to change-making conversations over the past almost 5 years through the show. I hoped my recording with Katie could be an enlightening conversation. I wanted to scratch beyond the surface of her public face. Equally, I didn't want her on my show to mercilessly ridicule anyone and everyone, as this is what she tends to do. I've kept the School for Mothers podcast clean of ridicule. Katie told me about finding her own voice.
So you find voice quite early when you are one female platoon out of an all-male Sandhurst military academy. I think you find voice. I went into business then. I was a consultant in New York working for a large business consultancy.
She swiftly moved on to examples of how she uses this. I should have guessed this was coming.
And then coming into media and TV, I suppose I then became known as this person who said things that felt very uncomfortable for the viewer. So that would be me with, say, on The Apprentice when I did that show. That would be me explaining in detail why someone was incapable, unprofessional or useless, very often direct to their face. And that felt awkward. Or me on a sofa on Good Morning Britain telling a large person, a fat lady, that I wouldn't employ her because she was overweight and therefore simply wouldn't be effective in my business. That felt uncomfortable. But it felt uncomfortable, I think, for the viewer, because we're just not used to those sorts of things being said outwardly. In fact, we are much more comfortable with people that keep those thoughts to themselves and don't say them. And I think actually that is why I have a voice now and a platform.
What is the purpose of actually mentioning, that somebody wouldn't be employed because they're overweight? What's the good of that in terms of the public service, the collective good?
I see what you're saying. And that would be as if we were all here and the only time you're allowed to open your mouth is if your ambition is to perpetuate or propel forward some kind of collective or public good. That's the way you framing this up. What I don't do is that. I don't frame my life around searching for some collective good or being perceived as some kind of altruistic bedfellow that's going to do good things for you. I frame myself up as being bluntly honest. So as an employer, I'm now accountable for so many things in life. I'm accountable for people's sexual habits. I'm accountable for when they have children. I'm accountable for when they conceive and how long they want to take time off. And I'm accountable for paying people for their health.
Katie was on a roll.
So if I have someone who's very large, I think it is within my remit and it is within my purview, a word that I love so much, I say it whenever I can.
Why do we all need to know that?
Because I'm just being very honest that I would not employ you because I don't want to take the fiscal accountability for your healthcare issues that you will surely have. I think that's just very honest. I think you're awkward with it and you're trying to package it into why would you do that? Whereas I'm just saying, no, as a business person, this is my truth.
Let's just cut to the chase, Katie. At this stage, I'm hanging on to my calm voice. Let's see if it stays that way.
The point is that if I just said things that were very unkind or cruel or were a public bad to your framing, then of course you would just be a mad woman shouting in the rain. You would just be a lunatic being unkind.
Good point, Katie.
And so, where I come from is also a place of connecting with real people and what they actually think. I'm not saying everyone agrees with me.
Katie sees herself as
a regular mum of 3, and I'm super confident about what I am and who I am, which is why somebody like you trying to suggest that I'm a figure of hate doesn't touch me.
She believes people agree with her as she voices things others are thinking, but don't say.
Someone somewhere has thought something similar, or someone somewhere thinks, oh, yeah, I think a bit like that. I couldn't say it, but I think a bit like that. I'm just saying people have thought these dark thoughts at some point. They just wouldn't say them.
This was the moment to ask Katie direct why she thinks people stop short of putting voice to their thoughts. But I didn't. Interviewer fail. As you heard, I'd already pressed her for why she wants to comment on employing fat people. In other words, what's it all for? We seem to hold different reasons for having voice. Here's more.
We have been brought up to believe that the only time people are allowed to speak to us is if they're going to say something pleasant, polite, or that will boost us. And it's something I'm very scared for our children and for these ridiculous mothers who let their children have telephones. And that's nearly all mothers out there, probably many of your listeners.
Whoa, Katie, that's a curveball. Where did that come from?
Now, I cannot understand for one moment why someone thinks someone under the age of 13 should have a telephone. And they're going online, they're posting pictures of themselves, and the only response that they will accept is being told they look beautiful or lush, or whatever the correct word is in youth speak today. You go on there and anyone would be unkind about that picture, and you've got mothers going into head offices, you've got mothers going into schools to complain. This is where mums completely stitch their kids up, and we're bringing them up to think, if you post a picture, the only thing people can say is nice stuff. That's not reality. That's not the truth of the world.
Katie's like a dog with a bone about the truth. Isn't she talking about her truth? Not necessarily mine or yours. I'm not up for an argument about kids and phones. It's not the focus of my interview with her. My disinterest is palpable. I don't have any children under 13 with phones.
You're probably about, less than 1% of mums have managed to resist the phone thing.
Yeah, I understand why. I really understand why they've got them. And more importantly for me, the whole point...
Why? Why do you understand why you've got them?
Listen for the gear shift in my voice.
Well, for all sorts of reasons, Katie, like safety.
No.
Just keeping in touch with them. Just keeping in touch.
Safety is that's just a way of bluffing yourself. Kids have never been more safe by having a telephone. I completely disagree with you.
Well, that's fine. We can disagree. That's the whole point. We can have different points of view, can't we? We don't need to agree with each other.
Leaving it there wasn't enough for Katie. I have opinions about phones and kids, but this exchange felt more like someone wrangling a fishing rod, trying their hardest to reel in an argument. Any argument, just for the sake of it.
I'm asking for your point of view, though. I'm asking why you think phones make people safer. That's all. I'm just asking for your opinion.
I know people that have got children with phones at 7. I don't particularly want to dictate to anybody when is the cutoff point, because families' situations are so very different. So how would I know the inside of anybody's life? Why would I know? For me, it doesn't trigger the kind of, oh, that's a disgrace.
I'm not playing ball, so Katie resorts to unsolicited feedback.
You sort of whiffle-piffle around it, though, don't you? So there's the sort of thing, I guess, the difference I note observing about you and I is that I have a strong view and I'm willing to say it, and that's different to yours, but that your view is very much trying to encompass everyone and please everyone, almost like you don't have your own opinion because one of your opinions might offend someone.
I just don't particularly worry about a telephone issue. I have strong opinions. No, I'm not whiffly-piffling around to please everyone on the podcast.
This isn't enough. She still wants more.
I was just asking for your one opinion on why you think phones make children safer. We can move along. I just notice how having an opinion can be difficult when you're trying to please everyone. I'm not at any point trying to please everyone, whereas you're possibly trying to please your listeners.
No, my listeners know I say deeply unpopular things. I'm not worried about that, Katie. I'm more concerned about kind of getting underneath an identity and this thing that's actually deeply important to all women, which is an avoidance of being a bitch. Actually, I think there isn't a woman that hasn't been touched by this. There isn't a woman breathing now, I really believe it, that hasn't tried to avoid it. And you're the epitome of whether I agree with your viewpoints, which clearly I don't on some things. And, that's why I don't particularly want to get into the specifics of an actual viewpoint. It is a really fascinating conversation about how are we going to get our females, particularly our girls, our daughters, our women in the world, getting even more voice. And it isn't by being popular.
Back then, I grappled with the ethics of giving airspace to Katie. At that time, this episode felt too dangerous to publish. Listeners, what was I supposed to do? Selfishly, I hid behind the internal narrative of, I don't want to give her any more clout. I told myself lots of people would have been horrified if she was a guest on the show and that they'd have thrown their hands up and said, why are you giving her a platform of all the people, Danusia? I worried that airing her episode would destroy this podcast and my professional career, if only through guilt by association with Katie and the ills that she's accused of in her professional and personal life. Back then, I was scared putting this episode out would jeopardize the future of this podcast and everything I've built. I believe we live in a social media environment where if we as much talk to someone who holds controversial beliefs or espouses different beliefs than us, we are, as a matter of fact, guilty by association. It's gone one step further than that. If we're seen to not publicly denounce dislikable figures, we're also guilty by association. If we don't get up on our social media platforms and say that certain people are evil and have no redeeming qualities, we get demoted, deranked, or throttled. We live in times when opinions get people cancelled. Let's set this in context. I was recording with Katie Hopkins around the time of the unfolding shit hit the fan situation on Tattle and beyond with Clemmy Hooper. Shelving this interview felt right. Juggling business, a house full of kids, 7 of my 10 were at home full time, and recording podcast episodes was enough. I took the easy way out of what I felt was too much of a dilemma. I've always, though, been a big believer in intellectual freedom. The thought of the suppression of ideas is an uncomfortable concept to me. Ideas need to be discussed whether we agree with them or not, or whether we like the person with those ideas or not. Often the best discussion is when we don't agree with everything someone believes or does, or the manner in which they do things.
I fervently believe that everybody has something to teach us, whether we like it or not. I believe there's something in there, if we can hear it or not.
But we live in a world now in which we believe we have to be 100% in agreement with someone we make a public appearance with or who we're friends with on social media platforms. 100% agreement with people we follow too. Because as soon as we see or sense any divergence between their opinion and ours, we start to feel concerned or start to feel fear or even shame. We start to wonder if we need to disassociate from this person. This dilemma is not new, is it? Societies have tried to protect and promote the essential rights of freedom of expression for centuries. It's a fundamental human right, forming the backbone of democratic societies. However, in recent time, this right has been at the centre of intense debate. Some argue that freedom of expression should be absolute, allowing individuals to express any views, any ideas, no matter how controversial or offensive. They say suppressing any form of speech, even hate speech, can lead to a slippery slope of censorship. Enter Katie Hopkins, stage far right.
I can't obviously do mainstream because, my views aren't acceptable and I can't be mainstream. And I don't accept that quietly, but I accept that that's the truth of the UK today.
Others argue that certain limitations on freedom of expression are necessary to prevent harms such as incitement to violence, hate speech, or the spread of misinformation. They emphasise that safeguarding the rights of marginalised groups and protecting public safety is essential. When I slipped my Katie Hopkins interview into the unpublished podcast archive, I was not only protecting my reputation, but also avoiding potential backlash and condemnation. I was reacting to this fragile balancing of the need to protect vulnerable communities from hate speech while also respecting free speech rights. I hit bang smack up against the significant challenge of diverse viewpoints being able to coexist. Meanwhile, I kept recording insightful and game-changing interviews with thought leaders who also happened to be mothers. From veteran second-wave feminist author Erica Yong to Mary Fitzgerald Bonnet from Netflix's Selling Sunset, MPs, comedians, academics, adventurers, New York Times best-selling authors, journalists, medics, corporate execs. Episode 114 was called Bitch, and my guest, Nick Stone, New York Times best-selling author of Dear Martin, her first novel of several tackling American race relations, took it on with gusto. It's honestly one of my favourite School for Mothers conversations. This and other SFM interviews are a contribution toward cultural change. Katie sat on the shelf. Let me repeat. During our interview, Katie kept on about the fact that she speaks her truth and spreads the truth she sees. Her unwillingness to engage empathically with the truths of vulnerable or marginalised communities is arguably evidence of disregard for the feelings and experiences of others. Promoting a healthy dialogue while mitigating harm truly asks us to find a balance between freedom of expression and responsible speech.
Where do you take responsibility and hold yourself accountable?
Oh, everything. And I need to own people's reactions to my choices. And so in the daily way, if I upset someone, I have to own the fact that I've upset them, assess, whether I need to do something about that or whether they just need to deal with the fact they're upset.
Katie extends this to her relationship with her husband, Mark.
Lovely Mark is known as Lovely Mark. He's known as Lovely Mark because he is the loveliest person, and people are always massively surprised that I'm married to him. So if I upset Lovely Mark, I have to ask myself, okay, have I been a bit of an arsehole here? And very often the answer is yes.
What do you do with yourself as an arsehole then? Because we're all arseholes, but your career's built on it.
We are. My career's not built upon being an arsehole. No, not at all. I reject that outright.
I didn't argue with Katie. Her divisive rhetoric and controversial opinions polarise public opinion and exacerbate social divisions rather than promote understanding and compassion. That's my take. George Saunders reminds us certainty is often mistaken for power, and what a relief it is to be in the company of someone confident enough to be unsure. I like to think I'm able to have a respectful discussion with someone I feel might hold the most vile beliefs on earth. Aren't people entitled to their beliefs and entitled to be wrong? Someone may have vile beliefs today and in 5 or 10 years' time no longer espouse those beliefs, if only because they had discussion that then shed light on those beliefs. Some people never change, even with discussion, but people around them might change. Stifling discussion, however offensive, doesn't lead to anything. Definitely not the betterment of the world. I respect people who engage in open, respectful public discussion because they know they're exposing themselves to judgment and to being dissected by the aggregate knowledge of the social media community. Of course, some people just want any platform to say whatever they want because they like the attention. There will always be people like that. In my life, Whether in corporate consulting or as a parent, I'm committed to going beyond single stories. To do this, exposure to diverse opinions and ideas are a must. I couldn't predict the episode I was too afraid to publish would be a catalyst. It's not about Katie herself. Oh no. Here's where I landed because of the episode I was too afraid to publish. I like Adam Grant's sentiments when he says the highest compliment from someone who disagrees with you is not, "You were right," it's, "You made me think." I've been questioning what it means to be a progressive thinker. Where's the line, for instance, between being a progressive and a polarising thinker? And how about holding downright obnoxious opinions? Of course, what's interestingly progressive to some might be heinous to others. And finally, what's so polarising that it just can't be aired publicly? Who draws these lines? My interest in debates isn't new. My most memorable moderating debate experience you won't know about, but was at the world-known Oxford Union with writer and feminist Germaine Greer and financier and campaigner Baroness Helena Morrissey on the motion, "Can women have it all?" It's a superb example where someone argues for the proposition at one point in time and changes beliefs at a later one. In an interview last year, Helena revealed, these are her words, "Looking back, I can see that it's women like me who've created the myth you can have it all. Today, I wish I hadn't been so stoical. I wish I hadn't helped perpetuate this pernicious illusion that we can breeze through big life events such as having a baby or enduring a miscarriage and carry on as if nothing much has happened." Beliefs change over time. Debate is a vehicle for cultural change. I believe we need smart debate. We especially need smart debate in parenting arenas beyond social media silos where groupthink reigns. A moderated debate space is needed, a place to gather where open and respectful conversation with people holding diverse opinions on how to navigate parenting can be aired. Now, as Brené Brown says, our job is to prepare our children to stand their ground for what they believe and fight for it while being understanding and respectful. It's a pretty big job because if our children have never seen us doing this, where do we think they're going to learn these skills? I looked for debate shows in the family or parenting podcast genre, but honestly, I found none. So here we are, a year in development with months in production. School for Mothers rebrands as Parents Who Think, a parenting debate show in late 2023. As host, I'll be moderating debates we usually shy from publicly. Parents Who Think is a podcast for idea exchange on hot button topics. Upcoming debates include, is having a favourite child okay? Are we creating mollycoddled kids? Can you love your stepchildren like your own kids? Is it ever okay to smack? Should schools teach about gender identity and sexual orientation? Are sleepovers too dangerous to allow? I've difficult debates with fascinating guests coming your way. If you're subscribed to this podcast already, you won't need to do anything to receive the new Parents Who Think show. To make sure you do hear what's coming up, make sure you're subscribed in your favourite podcast platform. Finally, I want to say a big thank you to everyone who supported the growth of the School for Mothers podcast. Listeners and reviewers, your loyalty and kindness has kept us going. Thank you too to my podcast team throughout the years, including Sarah Sherville, Max Mudell, Mia Roberts, Katie Clark, and Eunice Ray. Love and enormous thanks go to Harriet Melina Durban, who saw School for Mothers podcast through from the tiniest seed of an idea to the summer of 2021 when she moved on to new pastures. And finally, this podcast wouldn't be out in the world without our fantastic editor, Marie Cruz. You're a star. You really are. Listeners, it's been a blast. Come join me at the Parents Who Think show later this year. Till then, take care.
Thank you for tuning in to the School for Mothers podcast. To continue the conversation and keep your dose of inspiration up, head over to schoolformothers.com/podcast, where you'll find bonus content from Danusia and a guest on habits, recommendations, books, best apps, time-saving secrets, life hacks, health, sleep and anything in between. That's schoolformothers.com/podcast.